was cleaning the daycare when a 4-year-old turned to me and asked, "Does your family have the bathroom tradition too?" I giggled. "Everyone in my family goes to the bathroom," I responded jokingly. I meant to say the holding tradition, like who can hold in their pee the longest. Ian looked genuinely confused. "All the men in my family do it. Don't yours?" Something in my stomach dropped. "What do you mean holding tradition?" "Yesterday I held my pee for 14 hours. Daddy put a gold star on my chart. My record is 16, but I'm trying to beat Cousin Harry's 18. My assistant Rhea shot me a concerned glance. I kept my voice light. "That's a very long time to wait." "Not really. Grandpa once went 2 whole days. That's the family record." He said it with such pride. "When I become a real man, I'll beat it." I noticed him clutching his stomach like he had to pee. "Do you need to go now?" "Oh no, I'm only at hour 8. I can't give up now. Plus, if I fail today, I have to do thinking time all weekend." My hands stilled. "Thinking time?" "In the quiet room. It's dark so you can focus on being stronger. Last week I was in there from Friday after school until Monday morning because I cried when I wet myself. But I didn't have any accidents in there." He beamed. While I tried to remember a time I'd seen him drink water, another boy, Timmy, started walking toward the bathroom. "Where are you going?" Ian called out. "To the bathroom." "Already? You went this morning. That's so weak." He turned to another boy. "You should try the tradition. Start with 6 hours. That's beginner level." Sammy looked confused. "My mom says holding it too long is bad for you." Ian laughed. "My daddy says doctors just say that to keep people soft." I directed him into a quieter part of the daycare. "Wow, buddy, it must be hard to stay hydrated with all those rules." "Not really. I only don't drink water on Tuesdays or Thursdays. Or weekends if I've been weak." "When did you last have water, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He counted on his fingers. "Monday morning. I earned a cup for making it through the weekend dry." It was Thursday. This child hadn't had water in 3 days. I noticed his lips were cracked, his eyes slightly sunken. "The tradition makes us special," he continued happily. "Not every family is strong enough. Mommy says we're building character." During snack time, I pushed a glass of water toward him. Everyone drinks at snack time. His eyes went wide with panic. "But I haven't earned it. I'll lose all my points." "Different rules at daycare," I said firmly, watching him take the tiniest sip like it was poison. "My tummy hurts," he mentioned casually. "It always does by Thursday. Daddy says that means it's working." I was documenting everything on my phone, pretending to text. "Does anyone else in your family do the tradition?" "All the men, but there haven't been any boys except me." He puffed up with importance. "That's why I have to be extra strong, to carry on the tradition." The more sips Ian took, the more he couldn't stop himself from hydrating. And after gulping down 2 full glasses in one go, Ian had an accident. He doubled over in pain, urine running down his legs, sobbing. "Please don't tell them. Please. I'll have to go in the quiet room until Monday." "Let me help you change," I said, my heart racing as I took him to the bathroom. "I can do it." As I helped him out of his soaked clothes, I discovered layers of boys' underwear and duct tape wrapped around his chest so tight there were bruises. My blood went cold. Ian was biologically female. "It's okay," Ian said quickly, seeing my face. "Mommy and Daddy fixed the mistake when I was 3. I was born wrong, but now I'm Ian and I can do the tradition." "Sweetheart," my voice cracked. "Katie was weak anyway. She couldn't even hold it for an hour. But I'm strong. I'm a real boy now. See? I can do 14 hours. Still proud, still believing this was normal. "Who's Katie?" I managed. "Nobody anymore. Daddy burned all her stuff. Said she was a mistake, but it's fixed now. The tradition needs sons, and now they have me." He started rewrapping the binding. "Can you make this tighter? If my chest shows, people might think I'm still a girl." "How often do you wear this?" I pretended to use my phone as a torch while I measured the bruises against my phone case. "All the time." The moment I got Ian settled back with the other kids, I locked myself in the supply closet and called 911, my hands shaking. I have a 6-year-old with severe dehydration and systematic abuse. The parents are forcing their daughter to live as a boy. While waiting for CPS, I kept going with the questions, trying to keep her mind distracted. "Do you ever miss anything from before?" I asked gently. "No. Daddy showed me how stupid it was. I'm better now." CPS arrived within an hour with police backup. But after the investigation, 3 months later, the case was dismissed. The judge, an 80-year-old man, said while the methods were unconventional, there was no proof of malicious intent. Katie was returned to her parents. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I sat in my car outside the courthouse for over an hour with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The parking lot was mostly empty by then, but I couldn't make myself turn the key. Ian's bruised chest kept flashing in my mind along with those cracked lips, and how proud he was of holding his pee for 14 hours. The judge's words kept echoing about no proof of malicious intent, and I wanted to scream at how wrong he was. My phone buzzed with a text from Rhea asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer yet. Something cold and hard was building inside me, and I knew I couldn't just go back to work tomorrow and pretend none of this happened. I finally started the car and drove home, but instead of going inside, I called Rhea and asked her to meet me at the coffee shop on 3rd Street. She showed up 20 minutes later looking just as sick as I felt with dark circles under her eyes. We sat in the back corner booth and she grabbed my hand across the table. "We can't let this go," she said. And I nodded because we both knew we had to do something even if we didn't know what yet. We spent 2 hours going over everything we'd seen and making a plan to keep watching and documenting using code words at work so nobody would know what we were really talking about. When I finally got home, I dumped everything from my bag onto the kitchen table, including all the photos I'd taken on my phone and the notes I'd written on napkins and receipt backs. I spread it all out like evidence in a crime show with timestamps and dates and exact quotes from Ian about the tradition. My laptop was open and I uploaded every single photo to 3 different cloud storage accounts because I wasn't taking any chances this time. I grabbed a flash drive from my desk drawer and made another backup copy, then hid it in an old shoebox in my closet. The next morning I got to work early, but my boss was already waiting by my classroom door with that look that meant we needed to talk. She pulled me into her office and closed the door, then reminded me about mandated reporter guidelines and how I had to stay within policy boundaries, or I could lose my license. "I know you care about these kids," she said while looking at me with sympathy but also warning, "but one wrong move and you won't be able to help anyone." I nodded and promised to follow all the protocols while my brain was already working on what I could do that wouldn't cross any lines. At lunch, I sat in my car with my sandwich untouched and searched on my phone for legal aid organizations that might help. After scrolling through dozens of websites, I found Mariana Herrera, who specialized in child welfare cases and had a whole section about pro bono work for mandated reporters facing retaliation. I sent her an email from my personal account being careful with my words and asking for a consultation about hypothetical documentation practices. She emailed back within 2 hours saying she could see me at 6 that evening at her office downtown. I drove there straight from work and found her office on the 4th floor of an old brick building. Mariana was younger than I expected with kind eyes, and she listened without interrupting while I explained everything that had happened. She looked through all my documentation carefully, then explained the fine line between advocacy and defamation, and how I had to be careful not to cross it. She gave me printed templates for something called contemporaneous notes, and showed me how to document things properly with chain of custody, so it would hold up in court. "My husband might be able to help too," she said, and wrote down a name and number on a business card. Jeremiah Herrera turned out to be an investigative journalist who'd covered cases like this before. We met 3 days later at the park near the library where he explained he couldn't use names without consent, but was really interested in the broader pattern of these traditions. He gave me an encrypted email address and a special app for sending anonymous tips that couldn't be traced back to me. Monday morning came too fast, and when Ian walked into the daycare, I could tell right away something was wrong. He was moving all stiff like it hurt to walk and kept pressing his hand against his stomach. At snack time, I pushed a cup of water toward him like always, but he looked terrified and shook his head. "I lost all my points," he whispered so quiet I almost didn't hear him. His lips were more cracked than before, and when he finally took the tiniest sip, his hands were shaking. During free play, I was helping him hang up his coat when I saw a chart sticking out of his backpack with gold stars and red X marks all over it. While pretending to help him with his zipper, I managed to get my phone out and take a picture that clearly showed 18 hours, failed, written in red marker at the top. My stomach felt sick, but I kept my face normal and helped him put his backpack in his cubby. By Wednesday, his mother showed up right after lunch with his father standing behind her with his arms crossed. "We're pulling Ian from this daycare," she announced while staring right at me with cold eyes. "He needs a more structured environment." I knew she suspected I was the one who called CPS, and there was nothing I could say that wouldn't make it worse. Ian was holding his father's hand and stumbling a little as they walked to the door, and that was the last time I saw him at my daycare. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about Ian, so I opened my laptop and started searching for anything about holding traditions. After typing different combinations of words for hours, I found this weird forum buried deep in search results where parents were talking about making their boys stronger through not peeing. My stomach turned as I read post after post of parents bragging about how long their kids could hold it, and sharing punishments for boys who failed. One dad wrote about locking his son in a closet for 12 hours after an accident. Another mom said she made her kid wear diapers to the school as punishment for being weak. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking as I scrolled through years of these posts. Then I remembered Ian saying his cousin Harry held it for 18 hours, so I started searching public records for any Harry with Ian's mom's maiden name Gilbert. It took me all Sunday afternoon going through different county websites, but I finally found a Harry Gilbert who was in the hospital when he was 9 years old for kidney failure. The dates matched up with when Ian would have been around 3, right when his parents decided Katie wasn't good enough. My phone buzzed with Jeremiah calling about the forum screenshots I'd sent him. He told me he'd been digging too and found 3 other groups online where parents share these same ideas about making boys tough through pain. He said his editor might be interested if we could get more proof that this was happening locally, not just online. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown on Monday after work. When I got there, Jeremiah had a whole folder of medical articles about what happens to kids who don't drink water or hold their pee too long. He showed me cases from other states where kids ended up with permanent kidney damage or bladder problems from these same traditions. He said he needed something current and local to make the story work, something that would make people pay attention. Tuesday morning, I checked my email and found a message from an address I didn't recognize with just one line saying the Gilbert family has a history and to check county hospital records from 2015. I sat there staring at it for a long time, wondering if Ian's parents were trying to trap me somehow, but I forwarded it to Jeremiah since he had better ways to look up old records. He texted me later that the email came from a library computer so we couldn't trace who sent it. While all this was happening, I started making a list of every place Ian went besides daycare. His elementary school was on his enrollment forms, plus the pediatrician's office his parents listed, and the church they put down for emergency contacts. All these places had people like me who were supposed to report abuse. I brought the list to Mariana, who said if multiple people reported the same concerns, it would be harder for CPS to ignore. She made some calls, and the next thing I knew, I was meeting her sister-in-law Carlotta, who worked as a counselor at Ian's school. Carlotta couldn't talk about specific kids because of privacy rules, but she mentioned she'd been seeing more kids lately who wouldn't use the bathroom at the school. She said some of them would rather wet themselves than ask for a bathroom pass. We exchanged numbers, and she said we should stay in touch for professional development. 2 days later, Carlotta called me from her personal phone, not her work one. She said she'd just filed a report after a student almost passed out from not drinking water all day. The kid had been shaking and dizzy but still refused when she offered him water. She couldn't say it was Ian, but the timing matched up with when he would be at the school. She said having 2 mandated reporters file about the same kid might make CPS take another look. The very next morning, I got to work early and found my boss waiting with a licensing inspector who said someone complained I was taking inappropriate pictures of children. My boss backed me up right away, telling the inspector I was one of her best teachers. I showed the inspector all my documentation and how I followed every state rule about reporting suspected abuse. She spent 3 hours going through everything but couldn't find anything wrong with what I'd done. Still, the message was pretty clear that someone was trying to scare me into backing off. As soon as the inspector left, Jeremiah texted that he'd talked to his editor, who was really interested in a story about extreme parenting trends that hurt kids. He said they had to be careful not to use real names without permission, but the story could put pressure on authorities to do something. Mariana called me that same afternoon and asked me to bring all my documentation to her office. I packed everything into a folder and drove over, my hands still shaking from what had been happening. She spread my papers across her desk, checking dates and times on every single note I'd made. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing while she talked about how I'd stayed within every single rule for mandated reporters. She typed up a letter right there, explaining my professional duties and how I'd followed them perfectly. She printed 3 copies and had me sign them all, keeping 1 in her files and giving me 2 for my own records. She warned me that Ian's parents might try to sue me for defamation or harassment if they found out I was involved. She also explained something called whistleblower protections that might help if my job got threatened. The next day, Carlotta texted me about a doctor she knew from her church who worked in the pediatric ER. She couldn't give me his number directly, but said his name was Moses Solomon, and suggested I could probably find him through the hospital directory. I looked him up and called his office, leaving a message saying I was a daycare worker with questions about dehydration symptoms in children. He called back within an hour, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the hospital. He couldn't talk about specific patients, but he explained what would happen if a child came in with severe dehydration. He said they'd have to document everything, take photos if there were marks, and report it immediately if abuse was suspected. He gave me his direct cell number and said to call if I ever had educational questions about child health. Meanwhile, Jeremiah had been digging through social media and found something huge. He texted me a screenshot from Ian's mom's Facebook page showing a birthday party from last month. In the background, clear as day, was a chart on the wall with columns labeled hours held and punishment earned with Ian's name at the top. He'd already saved multiple copies before the photo disappeared an hour later. That got me thinking about what else might be online, so I started searching for Ian's dad's name on different platforms. I found a private Facebook group called Raising Strong Sons, where he was pretty active. The posts made me sick to my stomach. Men were bragging about how long their boys could hold it, calling kids who use the bathroom regularly weak and soft. Ian's dad had posted about starting the tradition when kids turned 3 because that's when you could break the female weakness out of them. I took screenshots of everything, especially the posts where they talked about punishment methods for failures. The group must have noticed someone new looking because it went completely private the next day. Carlotta called me Friday morning saying the child she'd been worried about had been absent for 3 days. The parents claimed it was a stomach bug, but hadn't provided any doctor's note. When the kid finally came back, the school nurse had documented that his lips were cracked and he seemed dizzy. The nurse was now checking on him 3 times every day and writing down everything she saw. Carlotta couldn't say it was Ian, but the timing matched up perfectly with when he'd normally be at the school. She said the paper trail was getting thicker every single day. Monday morning, I woke up to an email from a law firm representing Ian's family. They accused me of harassment and spreading lies about their parenting methods. They threatened to sue me for defamation if I didn't stop immediately. I forwarded it to Mariana right away, and she responded to them within 2 hours. Her response was perfect, stating that I had professional obligations as a mandated reporter and hadn't harassed anyone. She copied everything and added it to our growing file of intimidation attempts. Carlotta and I worked out a system where she'd text me, checking in, when she had updates about school. I'd respond with, "All quiet here," if nothing new happened at daycare, or "busy day," if I had information to share. We'd meet at the library to exchange notes, making sure we never violated any confidentiality rules. We were building a pattern that nobody could ignore. The documentation from both locations showed the same problems happening over and over. Jeremiah had been working with his editor for weeks on the article series. They decided to focus on dangerous discipline traditions, without naming any specific families. The first article came out on a Wednesday morning, featuring quotes from Dr. Solomon and other medical experts about how dangerous it was to make kids hold their urine. The article explained how dehydration could cause permanent kidney damage and how these practices were child abuse disguised as discipline. The response was immediate, with hundreds of comments from horrified parents. People were calling for investigations and demanding to know if this was happening in our town. 2 days after the article ran, Carlotta got a call from someone named Leonora Guest. She was a CPS supervisor who'd been reviewing all the reports that had been filed about the same child. She told Carlotta that she was reopening the case with a different investigator who specialized in medical neglect. The system was finally starting to pay attention to all our documentation. Then everything escalated when Ian's parents suddenly pulled him from the school. They told the principal he had a recurring stomach bug and they needed to care for him at home. They didn't provide any medical documentation even though the school asked for it multiple times. Carlotta immediately reported this to CPS, since isolating a child when people started asking questions was a huge red flag. Days went by with no sign of Ian at the school or anywhere else in town. Jeremiah called me late one night with something big. He'd been digging through old public records at the county courthouse and found a lawsuit from 2015. Ian's cousin Harry Gilbert had been treated for kidney damage at age 9. The hospital records were public because the family had sued the hospital claiming they'd made the wrong diagnosis. The case got thrown out, but all the medical files stayed public. Harry's chart showed severe dehydration and kidney problems from holding his urine for days at a time. The same exact pattern as Ian. This proved the family had been doing this for years, and it had already hurt one child badly. Meanwhile, Leonora called to tell me CPS had tried to visit Ian's house that morning. His parents wouldn't let them in, saying it was against their religious freedom and parental rights. They stood at the door and refused to move. Leonora wrote down everything about how they acted and what they said. She told me Ian hadn't been seen by any teacher or doctor or anyone official for 2 whole weeks now. She was already working on paperwork to get a judge to make them let CPS check on Ian. The next day, I got called into a meeting with HR at the daycare. They said they'd gotten concerns from someone about how I was writing things down about kids. I brought Mariana with me, and she explained everything I'd done was totally legal and followed all the rules. She had copies of every policy and law that said I was doing my job right. The HR person looked over everything and said I hadn't done anything wrong, but I could feel how much pressure Ian's family was putting on everyone to make me stop. Mariana helped me write up a statement for my licensing board right after the meeting. We explained everything that had happened and showed how I'd followed every single rule and law. We sent it in before Ian's family could try to complain about me and get my license taken away. The board wrote back saying they got our paperwork, and nobody had actually filed any real complaint against me yet. 2 days later, Carlotta called me excited because Ian had shown up at the school for just 1 day. She watched him carefully and saw marks on his neck where the binding had been too tight. The school nurse checked him right away and took pictures of all the bruises and marks. She wrote up an urgent medical report and sent copies to CPS and the hospital. This was the real proof we'd been waiting for. Actual pictures of the injuries on his body. Ian's parents showed up at the school the next morning screaming mad about the nurse looking at their son. They yelled about suing the whole school district for going against their rights as parents. They said they were taking Ian out of school forever to teach him at home. But it was too late because the nurse had already documented everything. The principal stood behind his staff and called CPS about the parents making threats. That weekend, Jeremiah's second article came out in the paper. This one was all about the holding tradition and how dangerous it was. He had quotes from doctors and experts explaining how making kids hold their pee could cause permanent damage. He didn't use any names, but everyone in town knew what family he was talking about. The article spread everywhere online, and parents were horrified that this was happening in our town. The whole community split into 2 groups after the article. Some parents came to the daycare to thank me and the school staff for protecting kids. They said we were heroes for standing up to child abuse. But other parents said we were destroying a good family just because they had different ideas about raising kids. My daycare actually got more kids signing up because parents liked that we watched out for children's safety. People were fighting about it all over social media, and the local Facebook groups were going crazy with arguments. 3 days after all this, Ian got taken to the hospital in an ambulance. He'd collapsed at the grocery store from being so dehydrated, and his stomach hurt so bad he couldn't stand up. Dr. Solomon was working in the ER that day, and he knew right away what was wrong. He ordered every test and took pictures of all the binding marks on Ian's chest. He documented everything about Ian's condition, including how dehydrated he was, and how his bladder was swollen from holding his pee too long. The bruises from the binding were dark purple and yellow all over his chest. Dr. Solomon's report said straight out that these injuries were from abuse and medical neglect. He called CPS right away, and they showed up at the hospital within an hour. Finally, we had the medical proof that nobody could argue with or dismiss. Leonora Guest walked into the ER about 20 minutes later with paperwork in her hand and 2 police officers behind her. She went straight to the nurse's station and showed them the court order while Ian's parents came running through the automatic doors looking mad as hell. His dad started yelling about kidnapping and persecution, but the cops stepped between him and the hospital bed where Ian was getting IV fluids. Leonora stayed calm and just kept pointing to the judge's signature on the paperwork that said Ian had to stay in protective custody for 72 hours because of immediate danger. The parents kept arguing, but the hospital security showed up and made them move to the waiting room, while Ian got moved to the pediatric wing for treatment. I watched from the hallway as nurses checked his vitals every hour and documented everything about his condition, including how he flinched when male staff came near him. The next morning, Ian's parents showed up with a lawyer wearing an expensive suit who filed emergency paperwork at the courthouse, demanding Ian's immediate release based on religious freedom and parental rights. Mariana called me within an hour to warn me I'd probably get subpoenaed for the hearing that was scheduled for the very next day, because the judge fast-tracked it due to the parents' lawyer claiming constitutional violations. I spent that whole day organizing all my documentation and photos, while Mariana prepped me for what questions I might face in court. Meanwhile, Jeremiah was doing his own research, and found something huge when he looked up the old judge who dismissed our first case 3 months ago. Turns out the judge was a board member of an organization called Building Strong Men Through Physical Endurance, which promoted exactly the kind of holding traditions Ian's family practiced. Jeremiah's editor confirmed this was definitely a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed, and agreed to run an article about it first thing in the morning, which would be right before the hearing. The article hit the newspaper's website at 6 in the morning, and spread all over social media within hours, with people demanding to know why a judge with clear bias was allowed to rule on Ian's case. When I got to the courthouse that afternoon, the hallway was packed with reporters and community members who'd been following the story. Inside the courtroom, I took the stand, and the parents' lawyer immediately started attacking my credibility, asking if I had any children of my own, and suggesting I didn't understand traditional parenting methods. I stuck to the facts and went through my documentation page by page, showing the timeline of Ian's dehydration and the photos of his binding marks, while the lawyer kept trying to make me look like I was against religious families. Then Carlotta took the stand and backed up everything I'd said with her own observations from the school, including the medical reports from the school nurse about Ian's condition. Dr. Solomon's testimony was the most powerful, though, because he explained in simple terms how Ian's bladder was damaged from holding his pee so long, and how the binding had compressed his ribs so much it affected his breathing. The parents' lawyer tried to argue these were minor issues that would heal, but Solomon had x-rays showing bone density changes from the prolonged pressure. Right in the middle of Solomon's testimony, Mariana stood up and filed a motion asking for the judge to step down because of his membership in that organization Jeremiah had written about. The judge turned red and started yelling about how this was a witch hunt, but the court clerk was already on the phone with the Judicial Review Board, who said there was definitely an appearance of bias that required immediate action. Within an hour, Judge Malik Navarro showed up to take over the case, and he wasn't happy about having to clean up this mess on short notice. Navarro spent 2 hours reviewing all the evidence, including the medical reports and testimony transcripts, before making his ruling that Ian would stay in protective custody for comprehensive evaluation. He said straight out that no religious or cultural belief gave parents the right to cause medical harm to their children, and ordered full medical and psychological assessments for both Ian and his parents. The parents had to leave the courthouse through the back door because protesters were out front with signs about protecting children from abuse. That night, I thought things might calm down, but instead Ian's parents started posting about me on Facebook with my full name and photo, saying I was destroying their family because I hated Christians. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with messages from strangers calling me horrible names, and someone posted the daycare's address telling people to show up and protest. The next morning, I found a dead bird on my car windshield with a note saying, "This was just the beginning if I didn't back off." Mariana helped me file police reports about all the threats, and got an emergency restraining order that said Ian's parents couldn't come within 5 feet, 100 feet of me or the daycare. My boss called an emergency staff meeting that afternoon where she hired a security guard to stand outside the daycare for the next few weeks, and made new rules about not talking to media or posting anything on social media about the case. All my coworkers said they supported what I'd done and would watch out for any suspicious people hanging around the building. A week later, the medical specialist's report came in with devastating details about the permanent damage to Ian's urinary system from years of holding his pee, including scarring that would need surgery to fix. The specialist also testified that Ian showed severe identity confusion from being forced to live as a boy when he was born female, and would need years of therapy to work through the trauma. During the first supervised visit between Ian and his parents at the CPS office, Ian wouldn't even look at them and kept backing away when they tried to get close. When the supervisor offered him water, he looked at his parents first and asked if he was being weak before taking the smallest sip possible. He went to the bathroom 3 times during the 2-hour visit, and each time he came back asking if he'd failed and would have to go to the quiet room. The supervisor typed up her notes about the visit while I waited outside the building, and 2 days later, Jeremiah called me with news that his final article was going live that night. He'd tracked down medical records from Ian's cousin Harry, who'd been hospitalized 3 years ago with permanent kidney damage from the same holding tradition, and the documentation showed Harry needed dialysis twice a week now, at just 12 years old. The article hit the front page of the local paper the next morning with photos of the medical reports and quotes from kidney specialists about how forcing kids to hold their pee for 18 hours could destroy their organs forever. My phone started ringing nonstop with people calling the daycare demanding to know why these parents weren't in jail yet. And someone organized a protest outside the courthouse with over 200 people showing up with signs about protecting kids from abuse. The prosecutor's office put out a statement that afternoon saying they were reviewing the case for possible criminal charges after seeing the medical evidence about Harry's kidney failure. Ian's parents showed up at the next court hearing with a new lawyer and a pastor from their church, who stood up and told Judge Navarro that their family practices were protected religious discipline based on biblical teachings about building strong character through suffering. The pastor read verses about sparing the rod and spoiling the child, while Ian's dad nodded along, but Judge Navarro cut him off and said no religious belief gave anyone the right to cause medical harm to children. The parents' lawyer argued this was persecution of their faith, but Navarro pulled out the medical reports showing Ian's bladder damage and asked how destroying a child's organs could possibly be considered religious practice. Ian's mom started crying and saying they were just trying to raise a strong son the way their families had always done it, but the judge pointed out that their own nephew was on dialysis because of these traditions. The night before the final hearing, I sat in Mariana's office going through every piece of documentation we'd collected over the past 4 months, making sure we hadn't crossed any legal lines or done anything that could get the case thrown out. She showed me how every report followed proper channels, every photo was taken legally, and every witness statement came from mandated reporters doing their jobs correctly. I looked at the stack of evidence filling 3 bankers' boxes and thought about all the death threats and the bird on my windshield and losing sleep wondering if Ian was safe, but seeing those boxes made it worth every scary moment. Mariana put her hand on my shoulder and told me we'd built the strongest case she'd seen in 20 years of child advocacy work. The final hearing lasted 6 hours with the courtroom so packed that people were standing in the hallway watching through the door windows. The prosecutor presented Ian's medical records showing severe bladder scarring, the photos of binding bruises on his chest, documentation of the 3-day water deprivation cycles, and testimony from Dr. Solomon about the permanent damage to Ian's urinary system. Carlotta testified about Ian's behavior at the school. The nurse showed her documentation of dehydration symptoms, and I went through my daycare observations while Ian's parents' lawyer kept objecting that this was all hearsay. The court-appointed advocate for Ian stood up with a thick folder and read statements from Ian's therapy sessions, where he described the quiet room punishments and being forced to wear duct tape so tight he couldn't breathe properly. Judge Navarro stopped taking notes and just stared at Ian's parents while the advocate explained how Ian still asked permission to drink water and apologized every time he needed the bathroom. When all the evidence was presented, Navarro didn't even take a recess to decide. He ruled that Ian's parents posed substantial risk to their child and ordered extended protective supervision with Ian staying in foster care indefinitely. The parents had to complete a full year of parenting classes, stop all holding tradition practices immediately, and undergo psychological evaluations before any chance of getting Ian back. They also had to pay for all of Ian's medical treatment, including surgery to repair his bladder damage and years of therapy to deal with the trauma. The judge ordered that any visitation would be supervised only, and the parents had to show real behavioral change for at least 6 months before even thinking about unsupervised contact. The prosecutor stood up and announced they were filing criminal charges for medical neglect and child abuse, based on the evidence presented, and Ian's dad turned red and started to stand up, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and made him sit back down. 2 weeks later, I got an official letter from my licensing board saying they'd completed their investigation of the complaints against me, and found I'd shown exemplary documentation skills, and followed all protocols perfectly despite facing harassment and threats. They actually commended me for maintaining professional standards, while advocating for a child's safety, and said my actions showed the highest level of childcare professionalism. Ian got placed with Leandro Race and Felicia Barron, who'd been foster parents for 15 years and specialized in helping kids recover from identity trauma and medical abuse. They set up Ian's room with both boy and girl clothes in the closet and told Ian to wear whatever felt comfortable each day without any pressure or rules about it. For the first time in 3 years, Ian got to pick out clothes based on what felt right, instead of what someone told him he had to wear. Felicia told me later that Ian spent an hour just looking at all the options and finally picked out purple sweatpants and a dinosaur shirt, then changed 3 more times before breakfast just because he could. 6 months later, Jeremiah won a state journalism award for his investigation series about dangerous discipline traditions, and the articles got picked up by national news outlets, which led to 3 other states opening investigations into similar cases. The state legislature announced they were considering a new law specifically making forced urine retention and chest binding of minors a felony, and they invited me to testify at the hearing about what I'd witnessed. My daycare director asked me to help rewrite all our training materials, using what we'd learned from Ian's case, creating new protocols for documenting suspected abuse, and coordinating with other mandated reporters. We held workshops for other daycare centers in the area, and within a year, our guidelines became the standard for the whole county, which meant more eyes watching for kids who might need help. 3 months crawled by before the review hearing arrived, and I sat in that same courtroom watching Ian's parents shuffle papers with their lawyer, while Judge Navarro reviewed the case files. Their parenting class attendance sheets showed they'd gone to every session, but the instructor's notes said they spent most classes arguing that their methods weren't harmful, and other parents were just too soft to understand real discipline. The judge read through each report with his jaw getting tighter, and when Ian's father started to speak about how the tradition built character for generations, Navarro cut him off and said reunification looked impossible without them admitting they'd hurt their child. Ian's therapist, Thomasina Cook, stood up next with her progress report and described how Ian now drank water whenever he wanted without asking permission and used the bathroom without counting hours or earning points. She explained that some days Ian wore pink shirts and sparkly shoes, while other days he picked basketball shorts and dinosaur hoodies, and Leandro and Felicia never questioned either choice, just smiled and said he looked great. The foster parents had removed all the locks from the bathroom doors in their house so Ian would never feel trapped, and bought him a special water bottle with stickers that he carried everywhere. Thomasina showed photos of Ian's weight gain charts and how his kidney function had improved, and mentioned he'd stopped having nightmares about the quiet room after 2 months of therapy. A week later, a manila envelope arrived at the daycare addressed to me, and inside was a crayon drawing of a rainbow with a yellow sun that had a smiley face, and at the bottom in shaky letters it said, "Thank you for helping me." Thomasina's note explained Ian had worked on it for 3 art therapy sessions, and specifically asked her to send it to the nice lady who gave him water when he was scared. I bought a frame that afternoon and hung it behind my desk where I could see it every morning when I opened the daycare. Carlotta called me that night about creating a system where mandated reporters could share concerns without breaking confidentiality rules, and we spent hours mapping out secure communication channels and pattern recognition protocols. We brought in teachers and nurses and social workers from across the district, and built a response team that could act fast when multiple reports came in about the same child. The school board approved our protocol within 2 weeks and made training mandatory for all staff with direct child contact. Mariana sent me an email confirming that Ian's parents' civil suit had been thrown out, because my documentation proved I'd followed every rule and never stepped outside my professional boundaries. The restraining order stayed active, and the death threats had stopped coming after the prosecutor warned Ian's father that harassment charges would be filed if they continued. My daycare actually had a waiting list now because parents heard about how we'd protected Ian and wanted their kids somewhere that would watch out for them. Leonora Guest called a press conference to announce the new rapid review system for converging reports that people had started calling the Ian Protocol, even though officially it had some boring bureaucratic name. She explained how multiple reports from different sources would trigger immediate investigation instead of getting buried in separate files, and mentioned our case had exposed dangerous gaps in the system. 3 other counties had already contacted her about implementing the same protocol, and the state was considering making it standard procedure. At the 4-month hearing, Ian's parents sat stone-faced while the judge reviewed their continued refusal to admit wrongdoing, and their therapists report that they still believed their methods were justified. Their rights were heading toward termination, and their lawyer kept objecting to everything. But Navarro had clearly made up his mind about what was best for Ian. Thomasina testified that Ian had told her he felt safe with the Race Barron family, and had started calling them Mama Felicia and Papa Lee, and asked if he could stay with them forever. The adoption paperwork had already been started, and Leandro and Felicia sat in the gallery holding hands while the judge made it clear Ian wouldn't be returning to his birth parents. Ian was learning to ride a bike and had joined a soccer team and got to pick whether he wanted to be on the boys' team or the girls' team or the mixed team, and chose mixed because he said it had the nicest kids. His parents would never hurt him again, and he was free to figure out who he wanted to be without anyone forcing him into a box that didn't fit. The whole thing had been terrifying and exhausting, but seeing that drawing on my wall and knowing Ian was safe and happy made every threat and sleepless night worth it, because sometimes you have to fight even when it's dangerous, and sometimes you actually win. That's a wrap for now. Thanks for just hanging out and exploring all these little details with me. Until next time, subscribe for more content like this.